talk about the ongoing situation in Ethiopia. The conflict between Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan forces has scored one solid year. And Western media propaganda is part of the ongoing situation. The media warfare is part of the incident and the tragedy that's happening here and there in the world. And the Tigrayan origin, an Ethiopian American journalist, Hermela Aregawi, is proving Western media wrong these days, and she's doing a lot in that regard. Hermela Aregawi is an Ethiopian American journalist having reported for outlets such as Al Jazeera America, the CBS affiliate in Los Angeles, and the Young Turks on Current TV, among others. She has recently been calling out much of the Western media's bias in reporting of the new nearly year-long conflict in Ethiopia. Hermela Aregawi, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Addis. Thanks for having me.
All right. I tried to highlight our today's topic. These days, your publications, your commentaries are becoming viral on social media, and you're getting, huge applause from Ethiopians and who lives in Ethiopia and diasporas abroad. And in the very beginning, you were a staunch supporter of TPLF, but after identifying the reality on the ground, you're criticizing TPLF's atrocious acts. Where is your U-turn in that regard?
So, I have to correct you. I was never pro-TPLF, and I wouldn't say now that I'm pro-government. I think that I just didn't have a very strong understanding of Ethiopian politics, and I was getting a lot of my information from Western media outlets. And so although I was a little bit confused and some of it didn't make sense to me, I did believe what I was reading in CNN, New York Times, and the AP about this being, an ethnic-based war. There was a communication blackout. The Ethiopian government wasn't really saying much. I had family in that Tigray region. So a lot of what I was saying, I thought was based on factual information. It's only after just observing the news outlets' coverage over the course of several months that I realized that it was very biased and that maybe the information I was getting was very slanted. And that's when I started to what you would call make that turn. And still I have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of things I don't know, and I don't necessarily think there's either side that's perfectly innocent. But I did realize that a lot of the media slanted in the direction of Tigray forces that are fighting the current government. And I thought that was really disturbing. So that's when I really started asking questions. Also, the activism had a big role in what I thought about the information that was coming out, because I was working with Tigrayan activists thinking that their cause was humanitarian in nature. And then I realized there was a lot of inconsistencies there as well. There's a lot of good people that are in that activism that think that they genuinely think this is a humanitarian issue, but the people at the top who are really setting the tone, who are setting the agenda, know very well that their agenda is very political, and that's why it all gets really mixed up. And I just hope that eventually people will be able to separate what is real and a humanitarian issue and what is really a political agenda.
Okay, good. TPLF is not alone, and there is a huge proxy war behind TPLF that is triggered against Ethiopia. And let alone other entities, the media warfare is part of the ongoing situation. How do you see this media warfare that disseminates false narratives about the ongoing situation in misleading the global community?
It's disappointing, to say the least, right? I'm a journalist. I'm a Western trained journalist. I rely on some of these outlets for a lot of domestic issues or information on domestic issues. So when you come to realize over the course of time that you cannot rely on them to tell you the information in your country of birth, it's disappointing. You start to wonder, what else can I not rely on them for in terms of information? I think that as much as possible, Ethiopians have to try to talk to each other to get the information, not rely on external outlets to tell them their reality. Like, for example, you know, when this whole war started, a lot of us of Tigrayan origin didn't understand what the whole genocide rhetoric was about. Like, we had lived with Ethiopians of all origins. I'd never been discriminated as far as I was aware because of being Tigrayan Ethiopian. My family's very mixed, like a lot of families, right? So I didn't understand where this all came from because my reality did not reflect that. Not to say that other people maybe didn't have that experience, but my reality didn't reflect that. A lot of the people around me, Tigrayans as well, said, well, where is this coming from? I have Ethiopian friends of all origins. There was even it's in the last few years that I even knew that some of my closest friends were Oromo or Amhara. Like, I just didn't know. We didn't talk about it, right? Like, we've been friends for 15, 20 years. All we knew was we were Ethiopian. So that's our reality. And then when you see the Western outlets and the activists tell you a different reality, I think it's important for all of us to question, like, is there really division between us, or is somebody telling us that there's division between us because of our ethnicity? Because what is ethnicity, right? Like, it's just something you're born into. Culture is just something that we can all share with each other. It shouldn't be something that we are fighting wars over. So I think as much as possible to try to stay united, to really question when people tell us we're different and that we should fight because we're different. Because at the end of the day, as long as we're poor, as long as education's not good, as long as healthcare is not good in the country, we're all going to suffer. Our families are going to suffer, and the country's going to suffer as a whole. So I think that looking at the outside media, we should really start to question what they're telling us about our reality.
Good job. Okay. The TPLF forces are using Tigrayan people as a shield in undertaking the ongoing conflict. And what went wrong, and why the Tigrayan people support TPLF, knowing TPLF is autocrat and doing very atrocious and heinous act on Ethiopians and doing all tragedies on its own people?
So I think it's a tough question. I can only speak to it from what I know in terms of the people that I have contact with and why they, at this point, support TPLF. I think that the narrative has been that even if you weren't political before, right now, because Tigrayans are being attacked for their ethnicity, you have to support whatever political group or military group is there. That's the propaganda that a lot of people have been hearing, and that's why I think that you do see a lot of support among Tigrayans. I do think that there's a lot of silent people also that may not agree with the direction things are going in after a year of fighting. We do know that Tigrayan forces have been pushed into neighboring regions of Amhara and Afar regions, so it really puts into question what this war really is about. I also do have questions about, the stories that we're not hearing out of Tigray, of families that don't want to send their kids into war, families that have lost several kids in war, right? I was watching and have been watching some coverage on Tigray TV about this mother who sent 5 of her kids into war. I mean, does that really make sense in 2021, whatever the reason or justification may be? I don't think so. There's a lot of layers. I can only speculate on why people think what they do, but I do hope soon that people can separate the politics from the people.
Good job. Okay, let me get back to what I spoke out a while ago. The conflict between the federal government and that of the Tigrayan forces has scored one solid year. And how do you analyze this conflict as a journalist? From day one up until these days.
So from what I gather to be true, it was TPLF or Tigray forces that attacked the Northern Command, and that's what started the war. Even Tigrayan leadership does not deny that. They just call it a preemptory strike because there was a buildup of soldiers around Tigray. But even if you were to take that to be true, I just think at the end of the day, by any international convention, if an armed group attacks a government military post, it's the beginning of a war, right? America would do it. Any Western country would do that. And so that, I think, was probably a really bad miscalculation, just from what I'm able to gather. And it has cost us a lot of lives. So I wish that never happened. I don't know. I don't fully understand the reaction from the federal government and from the Eritrean government's involvement as well, and how to really understand that. But it looks like at this point, the war was started by one entity, and by any standards, most governments would just continue to fight that entity.
Well done. Okay, another question. With its all heinous, savageous, atrocious act, still TPLF is receiving a blessing and support from the U.S. And we can easily say the U.S. is pro-TPLF one way or another. And still the Biden administration is striving to rescue TPLF. You know what I mean? We can easily recognize that from Biden's hurried decision to impose sanctions on Ethiopia is a signatory of supporting TPLF in that sense. Why the U.S. and the Biden administration become blind in recognizing the ongoing situation, the reality on the ground, and preferred to support the evildoers? What do you think as Ethiopian American, and what do you think as a journalist?
Geopolitics is a funny thing, right? It seems a little bit like gang wars. You pick a side, there's one power on this side, there's another power on this side, and then everybody becomes really a collateral damage or a victim as two sides fight. So the U.S., my guess, is standing with their former partners. They worked with the TPLF for a very long time, and that may be where they see their entry point into holding on to power and influence in the Horn of Africa and in Ethiopia. But as we know, some things expires, right? So I do think that it may be a miscalculation on the U.S. part to continue to support their old friends, because they just simply do not enjoy very much support in the country of Ethiopia, right? That's really just the bottom line. Whether it's the right or the wrong thing to do, they're still supporting a group that doesn't have a lot of support in Ethiopia. So I don't think the average ordinary Ethiopian should be punished.
Okay, you here. Yeah, let me pause you here. TPLF hasn't got immunity to take control and hold the central power now onwards, because it's a very worn out party, and it's sent to the edge by the popular uprising of Ethiopians. You see, this is gained through bloodshed, and no one would say, okay, for TPLF to get that chance again. But the U.S. is still very nostalgic with the regime of TPLF. They're so desperate to see the ousted TPLF getting back to the central power, which doesn't really work out. If this is the reality, why the U.S. is desperate to rescue TPLF, knowing the end result, which is the zero-sum game?
It's a good question. It's a big question. Countries do things that don't make sense all the time, including the US, or at least that don't make sense in terms of supporting peace. I don't know, honestly. It doesn't make sense to me at this point. I don't think it serves the US at this point. It certainly doesn't serve Ethiopia or the rest of the Horn. But also things can change. Things can change when a government sees that its efforts are futile, that it's not going to get anywhere pushing in one direction. It's possible that they will start to change their tone. I mean, you do have Congress people in the U.S. being very strong in their condemnation of TPLF. People like Congresswoman Karen Bass from California. She's on the House Foreign Relations Committee. She's talked about TPLF's use of child soldiers and its movement into neighboring regions. It's the redirecting of humanitarian aid for war. So you do have sitting U.S. Congress people talking about that, and that could have an influence in the way that the U.S. deals with this moving forward. But your guess, honestly, is as good as mine at this point as to why they keep hammering the same point and the same direction when it just doesn't look like it's serving anybody.
Appreciate it. Another question. At the very beginning of the war, the U.S. and other European Union and other Westerners used to yell about the humanitarian crisis in Tigray, but still there is humanitarian crisis in Wallo and Afar. More than 700,000 individuals have been displaced from Afar and Wallo, but we haven't heard any message and any remark from the U.S. yelling that humanitarian crisis is going on in Wallo and in Afar as well. What makes the Tigrayan privilege over other Ethiopians in your sense?
I don't think the West cares about Ethiopians. I mean, I really just don't. I don't think that they've shown that. I think that they have a very narrow lens, even for Tigrayans. It's still a narrow lens, right? They only care about Tigrayans insofar as it serves their narrative and language. Because if they cared about Tigrayans as a whole, then they would care that Tigrayans are being pushed into other regions to fight, to die. They would care that families were losing kids and fathers to fight this war. So even in their concerns about Tigray, it's very narrow. So it doesn't surprise me that their concerns does not go outside of Tigray, because even in Tigray, it's narrow, right? Do you know what I mean? So that to me is they're doing what they think they need to do to hold on to some sort of power. It maybe even serves them if that area is not stable or peaceful. Maybe it serves certain interests. We see how the humanitarian aid agencies tend to benefit from crisis, right? The more people that are displaced, the more war there is, and that they need to bring humanitarian aid into areas, the more funding they get, right? So it's
Sorry for the interruption. Is that possible to say? Is that possible to say the West knows very little about Ethiopia? Do you think it's very strategic? It's a very strategic place in the world, even for the West, and they know as their hand is palm, I think. Do you prove me wrong on that regard?
Well, I don't know if they don't care or don't know enough about Ethiopia, but I think the result is the same, right? So whether it's because they don't want to understand all the different regions and players that act, or whether they do and they just don't care, either way, it's having the same impact, which is the war is continuing. Millions of people are displaced in many parts of the north. And a lot of people continue to die fighting for, at this point, I don't know what cause. But whichever it is, the result is it's not helping the people.
The UN agencies, the so-called UN with with other coiny name, you can say whatever, UN related, UNSHR, whatever. These entities are spying for the US and they know everything in any nation in the world. And we can't easily say they don't really know about ongoing situation. They do it deliberately to substantiate your point. Sorry, Hermela Aregawi. Would sitting for a roundtable discussion with TPLF entity for negotiation this time round work out, do you think?
I don't know. That's definitely for a political analyst, but I do think there are some people within TPLF that can come to the table. I think it will be up to the people and the government to figure out who those people are and who those people are not, right? Just like everything else, TPLF is a big institution with many individuals. Some of them do the right thing, some of them don't. And I think that there should be a process to figure out who those people are, because there has to be some representation coming out of Tigray. We have to figure out who made the decision to start this war and to entrap the majority of those people in it, and who was just a victim of it, right? There are opposition parties within Tigray that wanted to have a voice. Could they be a part of the future conversation? I don't know. I think that's up to the people and the government to decide, right? So I don't think that negotiation will look like what it has been the last 3 years, because that didn't work. And I know there were a lot of efforts to get to the table and to come up with a solution that wasn't war. So it will look different, but I do think at some point there will need to be some sort of a talk. I just don't know when that is and what that will look like.
Okay, the administration which took the premiership this time is headed by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, right? And why the West turned a blind eyes to Abiy Ahmed's administration, do you think? Still favoring the ousted TPLF, the very worn out entity and the very worn out political party in Ethiopian history. Why they preferred to support TPLF and downgrade Abiy's administration, do you think? And why the West failed to understand all these progresses being undergone the new administration, and why they failed again to see the support that is given from the general public to Abiy Ahmed and its officials as well?
That's a very good question. I think it has a lot to do with geopolitics, who's behind him, and feeling like maybe he's not enough on their team, and so they need somebody who's all the way on their team. I mean, that's my general understanding of how geopolitics works. Maybe he's a little bit too strong and too resistant to whatever ideas that they may have. But a lot of that is just, based on what I can gather, a little bit of a speculation. But it's clear that they're not necessarily considering what may be good for the majority of Ethiopians in terms of who they're supporting. So it makes me think it's really about, who's on my team, who's on that team. Like, it's that basic, instead of really thinking about, okay, what is really better for the Ethiopian people and for the Horn of Africa based on what they have articulated they wanted.
Appreciate it. Okay, the Biden administration is still rushing to impose a sanction on Ethiopia. Would that purely resolve the ongoing situation in Ethiopia, do you think, again?
Absolutely not. It doesn't make any sense to impose sanctions on the average ordinary Ethiopian. We know the African Growth and Opportunity Act is really important to the manufacturing sector in Ethiopia. 80% of the people that work in that sector are women. Women are the backbones of families in so many ways. So when you're hurting a sector like that, I think you're hurting children and the average person in Ethiopia. So I think that's completely misguided. I hope it does not, they don't move forward with it. But I know it's being used as a tool to see if they can influence or get Ethiopia to move, but it doesn't look like it's going to work.
Good point. Okay, another question again. Among the sanctions banning Ethiopia from AGOA market is the one And if this is enacted and imposed on Ethiopia, more than 2.5 million employees would lose jobs. Why the US and the Biden administration failed to compromise this, and why the US government is always in rush to help to rescue the rebel and downgrade the vast majority of Ethiopians. What is your assertion on this regard again?
You know, power and influence.
Yeah, I know. It's very, I know what you're feeling, right?
Yeah, I'll say it, I'll say it broadly like this. We should not expect anyone else outside of Ethiopia, any other country, to care about Ethiopia. That should not be an expectation. It should not be a surprise when they don't. So I think a lot of the focus should be on Ethiopians. What can Ethiopians do to make things better, to be more at peace, to be more united, to grow the economic center, to grow the education sector, healthcare? I think in this global world, we should not be surprised that the U.S. is not saying things that seem to help ordinary Ethiopians or that seem to even push Ethiopia in the direction of peace. We should not be surprised when the European Union says things that seems to go against the average person. It's become clear that what they're doing is not necessarily based on what's right or righteous. It's about power. It's about geopolitics. It's really not necessarily logical or rational in terms of when you're talking about its impact on the ground. And that's why I think so much of the responsibility lies on you and I, Ethiopians from all over the place, the diaspora, that could be a power of positivity instead of toxicity. I think that as long as we're fighting each other, they don't need to care. They don't have to care. We're poor. We don't have as much power. But the second we're able to get to a certain threshold economically and we become self-sustaining, then we have a voice. Then maybe there's a way to push people to care or to push countries into caring because we have a lot more power, right?
Good point. Though it's too little too late, Congresswoman Karen Bass before 2 days issued a press release and by condemning and criticizing TPLF, and it's really odd for Ethiopians. And according to Congresswoman Karen Bass, TPLF should end the use of child soldier, pull its forces from Amhara, and end its alliance with OLA, where among the years criticized and warned by the Congresswoman. Where is the U-turn for this team to rethink and to see and understand the reality at the end of the day?
So she's actually been pretty well informed, I would say, from the very beginning. I think that she moved slow and she didn't want to maybe come out too strong in the beginning as she was gathering data. But for her, I wouldn't see it as a U-turn. I think it's a natural progression. She was one of the strongest, I would say, questioners and doubters of the narrative in the beginning. She was really pretty resistant to some of Secretary Anthony Blinken's claims, a lot of the claims that were being made through the documents that he had. So it's a natural progression for her. It's a very strong statement. I think there will be Congress people that look to her to get an understanding of what is actually going on in Ethiopia. But I got to tell you, I was kind of surprised at how strong it was.
I'm about to wrap up my discussion with you, but let me forward to you very funny incident. The TPLF barbarically killed livestock and burned down harvests of Wolo farmers into ashes, and it's really funny. And what would US expect from TPLF to level it as a terrorist group more than this incident?
Another good question. I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, this is about friends and enemies and old friends and new enemies. And I don't know that the U.S. is necessarily looking at whatever new information that is coming out to change their stance. I think it's really just up to Ethiopia to figure out what to do with that. We'll see if the U.S. moves in its opinion or if it sticks it out. I think at the end of the day, what happens in Ethiopia will be up to Ethiopians.
Okay, Hermela Aregawi, as I tried to mention in the very beginning of our conversation, you still proving Western media propaganda wrong so many times, including CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and other UN agencies as well. And what is your mechanism? How do you prove whether it's wrong or not?
So one, it helps. Right. So it helps that I've had more than 10 plus years of experience working as a journalist, right? That's one. Two, it's not that hard. They're not trying that hard. You know, it's,
Hermela, would you like to share us, because we are journalists too, and how do you do that?
So if you're paying attention, you can actually see, even in the same article, they will say one thing and then but kind of say the opposite, right? So for example, if you're seeing all these places say there's a de facto humanitarian aid blockade by the Ethiopian government, but then you go to the World Food Programme's Twitter, you go to UN, and you're seeing them saying, hey, we're getting humanitarian aids into Tigray. And then, but you still hear the UN say there's a de facto humanitarian aid. I mean, it's right there. It's right there. It's just a matter of connecting it, right? It's a matter of caring enough to connect it. So, and then when you see that, at least, you know, BBC reported the Tigray forces in early September went into Amhara and Afar regions and killed thousands, and they quote Tigrayan leadership and the Ethiopian military. It's right there. So when you see CNN not bringing that up, or AP or New York Times not bringing that up, then you can say, hey, why are you not bringing that up? Because at least this one place says this is happening. So it's just a matter of paying close enough attention. And I don't think they expect us to pay that much attention or something, or maybe they don't think that we'll make enough noise for it to matter. But to be honest with you, it's not like they're being that sophisticated in their narrative. You will catch them in the inconsistencies just by paying a little bit of attention.
We thought that these big medias are never lie, but we keenly understood that these days they do their business. They don't even care, and they never give a fig about others' interest. Let me put one quote and one intro by BBC. When big people talk, they talk to the BBC.
Yeah.
It just, yeah, it's really funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I like the I don't give a fig. I think I might use that. They don't give a fig.
They're
I haven't heard that one.
Sorry to say this, they're liars anyways.
Yeah, it's a weird world we live in. I don't know.
Okay. Lastly, regarding this media warfare, because you're the right place to tell the reality to others and to the global community, and your words matter because you're working for a very reputable organization, and still you can easily get to different people's, including very important people as well. And what do you like to say finally about ongoing situation to the global community in telling the reality, and what ought to be done to have a paradigm shift of bringing the reality to the global community and forgetting the false propaganda disseminated by TPLF and their sympathizers?
Yeah, I would say, and maybe I'm too idealistic, but at the end of the day, the truth makes us all better and makes us all more at peace. It helps us all grow. I think globally that's true. I just think we're living in a different time than maybe we have in the past, that these sort of turf wars and literal wars just don't serve anybody. It doesn't serve the United States. It doesn't serve any Western countries, and it doesn't serve Africa. I think there's plenty for everyone. We don't have to have this scarcity mentality where somebody has to be down for us to be up. I think that's true within Ethiopia alone, and I think it's true globally. So that's all I can say. There's plenty for everyone. We just have to try to stick with the truth, try to always find some peace as we're growing in different ways. And I just hope there is like a global paradigm shift in that direction, because it's just that the time will not be served by the way that we used to solve differences before.
Hermela Aregawi, thank you very much for your expertise, and thank you for sharing your knowledge on the areas of the ongoing situation in Ethiopia. And thank you for, allotting your precious time to tell the truth to the global community. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Addis.
Bye-bye. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us so far. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. See you next time with another episode.